So let's hear it for Aaron McGowan and our music team. And we trust that Jeffrey, it's all in divine order. He was really good the first service, as he always is. So, good morning. So we are in 2013, and our theme this year is Who Are You Called to Be? And who are we called to be as a community? Who are we called to be in the world? What is seeking to express through us? So we'll be exploring that in its many different aspects throughout this year. And we began by asking the question, how are we called? And what we've discovered is that we're all called in different ways. Some of us are called quietly, like Samuel in the middle of the night, like Martin Luther King, who said that his ministry was a very quiet unfolding. It wasn't a big earthquake or thunderbolt or anything. And there are callings that are like big, loud thunderbolts or burning bushes, like Moses when he was called by God. Well, like Gandhi when he was thrown from the train in South Africa, and he knew that he was to stand up for discrimination, to fight discrimination, and to fight for the freedom of India. Last week we talked about the idea that not only sometimes are we called, but then we refuse the call. We let the call kind of go to voicemail. We don't even hear it, or we don't pick it up. And when we refuse the call, we're like Moses, who said, well, you know what, I can't really lead the people of Israel out of Egypt because I'm slow of speech. I'm not a very good public speaker, and this is not going to work for me. And of course, God ignored him and kept on telling him. Or we refuse the call when we're like Bilbo Baggins in the Shire, and we're just really happy with our food in the pantry and our nice comfortable chair and our pipe, and it's like, you know what, I don't think I want to leave. Or we're like Jonah, who not only refuses the call, but he runs away, clear in the other direction. So what I want to look at today is, where do we go after that? When we get the call, there's this place that we end up waiting sometimes, not always. Dr. Seuss called it the waiting place, for those of you who remember the book, Oh, the Places You'll Go. He said you're waiting for the snow to snow, or the rain to go, or a plane, or a better day, or you're waiting for the phone to ring, or something better to come along. And the truth is that sometimes in our lives we end up in this place that nobody really wants to be, but it's called the waiting place. And that's where Jonah ended up when he ran from God. When we left off last week, he was on the ship, and there were turbulent seas, and sometimes when we refuse our call, we too experience turbulent seas. We experience turbulent emotions. In fact, Joseph Campbell said it this way. He said, when the call isn't answered, you experience a kind of drying up and a sense of a life lost. So there's always this feeling of things are a little bit out of sorts. So Jonah is on the ship, there's turbulent seas, and the sailors who are running the ship are like, oh my gosh, we're going to sink, what's going on here? And they finally figure out that it's Jonah, and Jonah says, hey, you know what, just throw me overboard. It's okay, just throw me overboard. So they do, they throw him overboard, and you know the story. Jonah ends up getting swallowed by a giant fish, and he spends 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of this fish. Interesting, isn't it? Because how long was Jesus in the tomb? 3 days and 3 nights. And we also see it throughout cultures, in different myths. There's this 3 days and 3 nights in the darkness, or in the belly of a whale, or in the tomb. There's this place of darkness where one goes. And what happens to Jonah in this place is that he realizes that you can't get away from God. You know? He can't get away from God. We can't get away from God, and he can't get away from his calling, and he can't get away from his destiny. We may try, we may do all these things to ignore and avoid it, but it's there, and it's calling us. And so once he surrenders to that, then the story continues, which is actually kind of what Ash Wednesday is about, because he goes to Nineveh and he convinces the entire town to change their ways. The truth is that the call that is within us, the call of God, the call of Spirit, is life-giving. It's that little part or big part inside of us that says, yes. You know, you hear about something and you go, yeah. What's that? I don't know, but it's calling me. And those are important moments to mark and to remember. Now, the truth is that some people receive their calling at a young age. Some have it just thrust upon them by necessity. And I read an article this morning that spoke to how some people do receive their calling fairly early and kind of avoid that waiting place. And the article was about two brothers. They're twins. Their names are Evan and Eric Edwards. Now, Evan and Eric were born with severe food allergies, and they had to carry an EpiPen around with them all the time. Everybody know what an EpiPen is? You know, those big, they look like giant magic markers, and when you go into when you can't breathe, I've had a couple of experiences like that where I was allergic to shellfish, and my face blew up. I looked like I was from Mars or the moon, and my throat started to close up, and I had an EpiPen, and it took care of it right away. I don't have that problem anymore, don't know why, but glad the EpiPen was there. Well, they were raised with this kind of issue, and they couldn't leave the house without their EpiPen. So what they decided to do was to come up with a different version of the EpiPen, and they decided this when they were really little. So when they went to college, they sat together and they looked through the catalog, and they're brothers, and they go, okay, you take this and I'll take this, and you study this and I'll study that, and we'll come together and we're going to create something new. And so Evan got his degree in engineering, and Eric got his degree in pharmaceutical sciences. Interesting. And they created a new product called an AUVI Q and AviQ. And what it is it's an EpiPen, only it's in the shape of a smartphone. So it's a smartphone, so for it's not a smartphone, but it looks like a smartphone, and so people who have a phobia about needles, you don't even have to see the needle, and it has voice instructions. So when you're in your panic attack, somebody else can take it and follow the directions and give it to you. So this experience was 15 years in the making for them, and they just signed a $230 million licensing deal with a French pharmaceutical company. Amazing, isn't it? And you know, one of the things that one of the brothers said was, this wasn't just an invention. This is something that I knew I was going to have to carry with me every single day. So why not make it easy? Why not make it in the form of a smartphone instead of a big clunky pen that people leave around? Although, thank God for EpiPens. So sometimes, you know, we have our calling, in a sense, our destiny thrust upon us because of the situations that we experience in our lives and through the things that happen to us. But what happens when we may not get that calling as clearly? So again, Jonah, in the belly of the whale, realizes that there's nowhere you can be where God is not. You cannot get away from your calling, your destiny, and God. And by being in the belly of the whale or the tomb or whatever the dark night of the soul, whatever it is called, it's that quiet place, the place where we go deep inside. A man by the name of Michael Mervosh said, "I have come to the conclusion that many of us are unwilling to do what it takes to get close enough to ourselves and deep enough within ourselves to really listen. Yet this inner descent, this inner space making is what is needed so that we become more able to listen to what is down there in the depths, waiting to be heard." Is this not what Jonah was doing? He was in the depths, waiting to be heard. Have you ever found yourself in the depths with no other choice but to listen? Rumi said it this way: "All day I think about it, and then at night I say it. Where did I come from? And what am I supposed to be doing? I have no idea. My soul is from elsewhere, I'm sure of that, and I intend to end up there. This drunkenness began in some other tavern. The drunkenness that he speaks to is the not knowing, is the feeling like I kind of remember, I kind of know it's kind of there, but I don't quite have it. It's a bit unformed. Joseph Campbell goes on to say that if we try to name what it is that we're seeking, we deprive ourselves of it. That many times when we are seeking the calling, we're expecting it to be magically provided and clearly presented, and yet that would rob us from finding what that is. Now, this talk is not one that's sort of tied up with a bow. It's more like we're entering into the belly of the whale. We're entering into the space and the place of the not knowing, because it's part of the process. And to ignore that it isn't part of the process is to, I think, do a dishonor to our calling. So the Rumi poem points out to the lack of clarity, and that it began somewhere else, and that we become troubled by this lack of knowing. And sometimes, because we don't know and we can't hear, it becomes even more difficult to hear what is calling us, and so it becomes a kind of like a loop. When we accept the condition of not knowing, it allows us to open a space. It allows us to open a space to what is already there. And so instead of searching, it is being present with what is. And it's keeping a neutral and open transition space, a not yetness. Is that big enough for you? Anybody ever been there? So there's a parable that Jesus shares that really speaks to this. And it's not a parable that I actually hear used much in the New Thought movement, because it's one of those strange ones that you kind of go, what? And it's the parable of the 10 virgins. And they are waiting for the bridegroom. And this is in traditional Christianity, this scripture is used to illustrate the fact that we don't know when Jesus is going to return. Now in unity, we know that Jesus, or the Christ, is within us all, and it is awakening to us in every moment. The second coming is now. It's not some moment when Jesus is going to come riding in on a cloud. Anyway, the scripture goes, there's 10 virgins, and they're waiting for the bridegroom. And 5 of the virgins have lamps with oil, and the other 5 virgins have lamps, but there's no oil. And they don't know when the bridegroom is going to come, but they need to be ready. And so they're waiting, and they're waiting, and they're waiting, and there's no bridegroom, and then they all fall asleep because, hey, they've been waiting and waiting. And in the middle of the night, the bridegroom shows up. And the 5 virgins with the oil in their lamps, they get up, they light their lamps, and it's like, all right, here we go. We're going to the banquet and the ceremony and the festivities. The 5 virgins without the oil are like, hey, we don't have any oil. Can you loan us some of your oil? And the women with it say, no, get your own oil, really. And so you need to go to the store and get your own. And so the 5 virgins without the oil, I don't know where there's an oil store there, but they go off to get the oil. And while they're off getting the oil for their lamps, they all go into the banquet hall and they shut the door and they lock it so that when they return, they can't get in. And they missed their opportunity. They missed their calling, in a sense. If the bridegroom was to represent, say, the awakening or our purpose or our calling, yes? And we don't know when it is or where it is necessarily, but we need to be ready. So what does that mean? So the virgin can represent our expectations, our hopes, our innocence, our readiness, and the 5 would be the 5 senses, right? So let's look at it from the 5 virgins with the oil are the 5 senses in us that are ready, that are prepared. And what does it mean to have your oil in your lamps? A lamp gives light. The oil provides the fuel so that the light can shine. I think it represents you and I when we are listening, when we are participating in our spiritual practice, when we are witnessing, when we're entering that place of the belly of the whale where we're willing to not necessarily have it named, but to show up every day, to show up and listen, to show up in silence, to show up and exercise, to show up and eat right. It's taking care of oneself so that the oil in your lamp is burning, right? The 5 senses, the 5 virgins without the oil, I think would represent when we don't take care of ourselves. We don't stop and listen to the inner voice through meditation or whatever form you use. They don't take care of themselves. It's like, yeah, I know I shouldn't be doing this, this, and that, but yeah, whatever, it's fine, not a problem. And then trying to borrow the oil from the other women, it's like we each have to do our own spiritual work, don't we? You may meditate from morning till night, but if I'm not doing it, it's not going to help me. So you can be doing your spiritual practice, and yes, being in your presence may be wonderful, but the truth is every single one of us needs to do our own spiritual work ourselves. Emily Cady in Lessons in Truth called it the secret place of the Most High. And it's a secret place because we can sort of tell each other about it, but not really. It's a place where we have to go to and enter into ourselves. I also think that the virgins who didn't share the oil, I think there's a little codependency going on there. I think the virgins without the oil are like, hey, you know what? Come on, give me your stuff. I don't have it. And it's like, no. Yeah, I mean, it's a real clear boundary setting, too. It's like, you know what? I've done my work here. I have done it. And for me to just start giving all of this in a codependent way, we're not talking about not serving, but in a codependent way would then rob them of their oil, and they would not be able to show up fully for the bridegroom, for the awakening, for the calling. So how many of you here feel like you're in that waiting place right now? Anybody? Look around, it's a lot. And it's a place that it's uncomfortable, and yet it's something, it's a part of the process. Because we don't always get like the EpiPen or, the smartphone that's gonna serve the same purpose. We don't always get the thunderous, yeah, this is it. But we need to be willing to listen and to show up for that. I've shared with you before that I have lived in a yoga ashram at the Shivananda ashram. And back in the late 70s, what was really big back then was channeling. Like one of the swamis, she was a young woman, would go into a trance, and Swami Shivananda, who was a medical doctor in India and a swami, and I think an enlightened being, would speak through her and say all these wonderful things to us, like, oh, you're a child of light. We'd be like, yeah, I'm a child of light, that's great. And you need to do your practice, and we'd be like, yeah, that's great. And it was really fun. And then she would start telling us that because we were so chosen, we would find a safe place when all the earth changes took place in the future in 1984. The earthquakes and whatever. And it was really exciting, it was kind of fun to be around that. And then the messages began to change, and she started to say things like, earth changes, you're gonna need to stockpile food and maybe some weapons, and then we figured out, that's not Shivananda speaking through her, because he was a pacifist. He was like a pacifist he would never, ever say anything like that. So Swami, the Swami Vishnu, who was the director, said, okay, guess what, everybody? We're not doing this anymore. We're going to go back to, we never left it, but we're really going to just go back to yoga. Proper breathing, proper exercise, proper diet, proper thinking. That's what we're going to do. And it was boring compared to what do you mean? I'm a child of light and I'm so great, It's like, no, we're just going to breathe, exercise, eat right, meditate, think positively. And the truth is, the organization at the time was, thousands of people. It was huge. We had these huge events. And when we said, you know what, we're not doing that anymore. We're going to go back to our practice here. This is what we're going to do. Literally thousands of people left. And the organization almost collapsed because it was boring. And the truth is, sometimes spiritual practice can feel really boring, can it? It's like, where's the pizzazz and the energy and the excitement? It's like, I'm sitting on my cushion and I'm listening to the silence, and yes, it's peaceful and great, but I don't know what's going on. And I'm waiting to listen. So I want to take a stand today for the quiet place, for the waiting place, for the belly of the whale, for that place that we don't really have a lot of language for, but it's that place where we know that calling is surfacing, that it's coming through us, that it's coming into manifestation. And I hear some music. So Jeffrey, come on out and bless us with your music as we move from the waiting place.